Cut day is here. The Chicago Bears have released multiple players to get down to their initial 53-man roster, which should be changing in the coming days, but I'll be reacting to all the cuts that we made today in this video right here. What's up, guys? I'm back with another Chicago Bears news update video, which I'll be giving to you guys this entire season. So if you guys want the latest Bears updates on what's happening with this team, definitely be sure to subscribe to my channel. But today I'll be going over all the cuts that the Bears made to get down to 53 men. Okay, so today by 3 p.m. Central, every NFL team had to go down to 53 men and cut, the not the majority, but a good portion of their, of their roster right now. And I'll be going over, some of the major cuts in this video. I won't be reacting in detail to every single cut because a lot of these guys, I kind of expected to be cut, but I will be going over the major notable cuts and also looking at the initial 53-man roster for the Chicago Bears. So let's just get into it, guys. So looking at the players that are waived, so Chase Allen, Isaiah Coulter, Micah Treadway, Dieter Eastland, Darrington Evans, Chris Finke, DeMarquise Gates, Thomas Graham Jr., Sam Kamara, Latavius Simmons, Charles Snowden, AJ Thomas, Demontre Tuggle, and Nasimba Webster. Looking at the vested veterans that were cut, so Sean Coleman, Trevon Coley, Mario Edwards Jr., Devontae Harris, Nathan Peterman, Michael Schofield, and Greg Stroman Jr. And then vested veterans cut with a non-football illness designation, James O'Shaughnessy, and then Tavon Young was put on injured reserve. So that is all the players that we cut. I'm sure that more changes are going to be coming, obviously, guys, because all the other teams in the NFL, they also cut a bunch of guys that the Bears could be interested in adding. So I'm looking for Ryan Poles to be active on the waiver wire because we are number 7 right now on the waiver wire. So we'll have a pretty good pick at, all the top talent available that got cut from other teams. But going over some of the major cuts right now, so I want to start by talking about Thomas Graham Jr., guys, because a lot of us had high hopes for Thomas Graham Jr. this year. Okay, he had a pretty strong ending to last year. He didn't play that much last year, only played in 4 games, but the little tape that we saw out of him looked pretty good. Okay, it looked like a capable starting outside cornerback, but unfortunately he's been hurt this entire preseason, the entire training camp, so we just haven't seen enough out of him so far to give him a roster spot, I guess, at this point. Now if he does clear waivers, if no other team claims him, I think he will be coming back to Chicago Bears, on practice squad or maybe put on the IR because I think he's still hurt right now. Okay, I don't think he's going to be able to play right now at the beginning of the season. So we'll see what happens with, Thomas Graham Jr. I'm still hoping we get to keep him on the roster on practice squad because he is, more talented, I would say, than most practice squad players are, given the tape that he showed at the end of last year. So that was a pretty notable cut. I want to talk about Sam Kamara next, defensive lineman who had a very strong preseason performance. Okay, in the 3 games that he played, he actually led the entire NFL, I believe, in pressures. Okay, so he got to the quarterback pretty often, obviously going up against second and third stringers though, so that's probably why, the Chicago Bears are hoping to bring him back on practice squad and didn't actually put him on the 53-man roster. It would have been nice to see him make the 53 given his strong performance in the actual games, but it seems like they like Mike Pennel over him, okay, because Mike Pennel, the veteran, actually made the roster over him and a few other defensive linemen. So he got cut. Hopefully he comes back. I also want to talk about Latavius Simmons, offensive lineman, who had a very strong preseason also playing at guard. Okay, this was actually a 7th round pick by Ryan Pace a couple years back, and he used to be a tackle. Last year he actually played tackle for the Chicago Bears, but the Bears coaching staff actually changed his position to guard, and he looked a lot better playing at guard. So I thought he might have a chance to make the roster, but he wasn't a Ryan Poles pick, so obviously, Ryan Poles is going to prefer his own guys at the end of the day, his own draft picks that he made this year, and hopefully we get him back on practice squad. But I would not be surprised if the Falcons, Ryan Pace, puts in a waiver claim for him given his strong tape at guard. DeMarquise Gates, a linebacker from USFL, also got cut, which I wouldn't say was too surprising, but it was kind of notable just given the fact that he had strong performances in the preseason games. Like, he actually looked like one of the better players on the field for the Chicago Bears, when he was out there with the backups. But again, playing with the backups, you're never guaranteed a roster spot, and especially coming over from a different league, maybe we get him back on practice squad, which would be pretty nice, but right now we did cut him, which is pretty sad to see. Going to the veterans now, okay, the vested veterans that we cut. I want to talk about Mario Edwards, obviously, because he was a starter for the Chicago Bears the last 2 years. Okay, and Ryan Pace actually extended him to a 3-year contract last year, which it wasn't a big contract or anything. Okay, it was only like 3 years, $11 million with very little money guaranteed, so we're not losing any money here. There was very little dead cap space. We actually saved, I think, 2.6 million in cap by cutting Mario Edwards, but he switched positions to defensive end in this 4-3 scheme, and that made it harder for him to make the roster because we already have pretty strong, promising talent at defensive end. Okay, we had, obviously Robert Quinn, Travis Gibson. We drafted a guy, Dominique Robinson. We signed Al-Quadin Mohammed, so that kind of left, Mario Edwards on the outside looking in to make this roster. Talking about Michael Schofield though now, guys. Okay, this is actually pretty surprising, I would say. Even though I expected Tevin Jenkins to win the starting job, I did not think that he would be cut. Okay, I thought that Schofield would at least be a backup on this team given his veteran status, but it seems like the coaching staff did not like what they saw out of Schofield. Okay, in the first preseason game that he started, he looked pretty rough. Okay, he allowed a pretty bad sack there going up against the Chiefs, and after that point, he never started again for the Chicago Bears with the first team. Tevin Jenkins completely took over, which I love to see, obviously, right? Like, you want the younger guy to beat out the veteran, and that is exactly what Tevin Jenkins did. So good for Tevin Jenkins. It's pretty funny though, because up until a couple weeks ago, everybody thought that Michael Schofield would start at right guard and that Tevin Jenkins might be traded, but I'm really happy that it turned into, the way it's turned into, okay? Because I would much rather have a younger guy that has potential going forward than an older, 30-year-old vet on this team. But this also makes me think that the Bears are going to be making some type of move on the offensive line, because why else would you cut a pretty, he's still a decent backup, right? Like, he's playing this league for a long time, and you want to have vets backing your starters up just in case injury happens. So look for the Chicago Bears to maybe make a claim or maybe sign another interior offensive lineman to be on this team. Trevon Coley, defensive lineman, also was a pretty notable cut, I would say, because he had a pretty nice preseason performance, which I thought might help him make the team, but it seems like, again, Mike Pennell beat out Coley, and also Sam Kamara as well. I guess he had better practices than Kamara and Coley did, because Kamara and Coley definitely look better in the real game action, but we'll see if any of them come back on practice squad. QB Nathan Peterman should be coming back on practice squad. This was a pretty expected move. The Bears are not going to keep 3 quarterbacks on the roster right now, so look for Peterman to be coming back on practice squad. And then talking about James O'Shaughnessy, tight end. This surprised me a little bit, because now this leaves the Bears with only 2 true tight ends on the roster. Okay, only Cole Kmet and Ryan Griffin. Jake Tongs is also a tight end. Partially, he's a fullback and tight end, so I guess that gives us 3, but still, that's not a big amount of tight ends on the roster. Usually the Bears keep like around 4, right? So we should be seeing maybe a move come at the tight end spot given this cut. So he got cut. And then lastly, I do want to talk about Tavon Young, cornerback, as well, because, man, I had high hopes for Tavon Young. Okay, every time he's been healthy with the Ravens, he's been a real strong starter, but that's a problem. He's never healthy, okay? And I expected him to be starting for the Bears at nickel cornerback, but it seems like the Bears are more interested in keeping Kyler Gordon at nickel, and then maybe signing somebody else to play outside, or maybe putting Kindle Wilder outside. We'll have to see how it actually shapes out week 1. But those are all the major cuts that the Chicago Bears made today. I'm also going to quickly go over the initial 53-man roster for the Chicago Bears, which again is going to be changing a lot in the coming days after waiver claims, after more signings, which Ryan Poles did say he's going to be looking to make some changes on the roster. So expect this to change pretty fast, which I'll have videos up for you guys about, okay, when we do actually make changes. But going over the roster right now, QB, we got Justin Fields, Trevor Siemian, no surprise at all. Running backs, we got David Montgomery, Khalil Herbert, and Treston Ebner. Only 3 running backs on the roster as of now. We kept 2 fullbacks though, okay, Kari Blasingame and Jake Tongs. But again, Jake Tongs also plays tight end, so he's kind of a versatile weapon in this Bears offense, and I do think he will be playing some tight end with the Bears. Otherwise, why else would you keep 2 fullbacks on the roster? Looking at the tight ends, then we got Cole Kmet and Ryan Griffin. Only 2 true tight ends, which is pretty interesting. Okay, that's a very low amount of tight ends for a scheme that I think will be going pretty heavy in some formations just to protect Justin Fields. So I do expect some moves coming at tight end relatively soon. Looking at the offensive linemen, we kept 9: Lucas Patrick, Cody Whitehair, Sam Mustipher, Tevin Jenkins, Jatari Carter, Zachary Thomas, Braxton Jones, Larry Borum, and Riley Reef. And the big takeaway here, guys, is that a lot of Ryan Poles draft picks made the team, which is obviously not surprising because they're going to value the guys that they chose. This regime is going to value those guys. So, Braxton Jones obviously starting at left tackle. We also had Zachary Thomas and Jatari Carter, both 6th-round picks, okay, that made this team, which is pretty nice to see. So we still could use some depth maybe in the interior of this offensive line because we cut Michael Schofield, but at least as of now, it seems like the Bears are going with the younger guys. Looking at the receivers then, we kept 7: Darnell Mooney, Byron Pringle, N'Keal Harry, Equanimeous St. Brown, Velus Jones, Dante Pettis, and Tajay Sharp. It's pretty interesting that Dante Pettis and Sharp both made this roster because they were also on the roster bubble, the last few weeks, but it seems like they beat out, all the other guys that were competing for that spot, which love to see, right? I mean, Dante Pettis had a monster last game with the first team offense. Okay, had a touchdown, had some really nice route running in that game, so it seems like that performance really won the coaches over up to this point. And then Tajay Sharp also made a handful of plays, guys, in the first game against the Chiefs, so that all makes sense. But I do think that N'Keal Harry will be placed on IR relatively soon, so that's going to open up another roster spot for the Chicago Bears when they do that. Looking at the D-line, so we got Robert Quinn, Al-Quadin Mohammed, Dominic Robinson, Travis Gibson, Angelo Blackson, Kyrie's Tonga, Justin Jones, and Mike Pennell Jr. The only surprise here is Mike Pennell beating out Trevon Coley and Sam Kamara, but otherwise this all makes a lot of sense. Looking at the linebackers, we got Roquan Smith, Nicholas Moreau, Matthew Adams, Joe Thomas, Jack Sanborn, and Caleb Johnson. And love that Jack Sanborn UDFA made this roster because I expected him to make this roster. You guys know I've been very high on him this entire draft process, so I'm love to see Sanborn get rewarded with a spot on the roster. And he could be starting maybe eventually, guys. I mean, Matt Adams isn't exactly a really strong player at linebacker. Okay, he hasn't had great performances so far with the first team, so I could really see Jack Sanborn maybe eventually earning his way into a starting role with this team. And he can also play special teams, which is pretty nice. And then looking at the defensive backs, we got Jalen Jones, Kyler Gordon, Kindle Vildor, Lamar Jackson. Jalen Jones, again, I think that's a typo on the Bears website. That should be Jalen Johnson, CB1. And then safeties, you got Eddie Jackson, Jaquan Brisker, DeAndre Houston Carson, Dane Cruikshank, and Elijah Hicks made the team as well. Love to see Elijah Hicks, 7th round pick, get rewarded with a spot on the team because he was on the outside looking in just because he was a 7th round pick and we already had 4 safeties on the team. But it looks like they're keeping 5 safeties and he should be a monster on special teams. And then finally, obviously specialists, you got Cairo Santos, Trenton Gill, and Patrick Scales. So let me know what you guys think about the cuts in the roster in the comments down below. Again, this should be changing in the coming days because we are going to be making claims on the waiver wire. We are going to be signing other guys that are available, other vets most likely, because I don't think this roster is set at all at this point in time. But hope you guys enjoyed the video. Leave your comments down below, and as always, bear down.